The following program has been made possible by grants from the General Motors Corporation, the R.J. Reynolds Company, and the Black Caucus Foundation of Michigan. Michigan's African American Empowerment Forum, Building Bridges to Equity and Equality, Part 1 of a public policy discussion on the status of race relations in Michigan by state lawmakers, government officials, business, and civic leaders.
Good morning and welcome to the General Motors building. We're really delighted to host this event this morning. It's very important to us that we have input from other community leaders, members of the legislature, civic leaders, as we start talking about how to address the diverse needs of a population as we enter the 21st century. Those of us in business understand that we will need to rely on minorities and women to buy our products more than ever before. But we also understand that we will need minorities and women to build and service those products more than ever before. So as we continue to embark internally in General Motors on various diversity initiatives, it's important that we do, from time to time, come together as a community and seek input from whatever source with a common goal in mind, and that is to make America reach its fullest potential. So I'm really delighted, Representative Stallworth, to join with you this morning in hosting this event. Thank you.
Thank you, Rod. This is meant to be a free-flowing discussion. In terms of a housekeeping item, all you need to do is raise your hand and touch the mic. It will be activated so you can address a question or response or add something to a comment by any one of the panelists at any given time. Paul Hilligans, you're used to being on the spot. As former Republican Speaker of the House and current president of Detroit Renaissance, which perhaps is the most powerful economic collaborative we have in Michigan, where is race relations on a 1 to 10 priority scale for both Michigan and your membership?
I was given the question in advance, so I've had a little time to think about it. Thank you, Keith. It's a pleasure to participate. It's hard to attach a number, but this I would say I think that the concern and focus about race relations is higher on the scale for the Detroit Renaissance membership, that being large employer CEOs, than it is for Michigan as a whole. I really believe that. The fact is that not unlike most states, we are a very segregated state. Our metropolitan area is probably statistically the second or third most segregated area in terms of housing patterns in the country. We are a society which unfortunately has not only come to live apart, but focuses on getting by without worrying very much, I'm afraid, about race relations. And we're at a stage where I think it's uncomfortable even when we do interact as a society in the marketplace, where it is uncomfortable for us to deal openly with the race relations question. In contrast, the employer community, for reasons already stated by Rod, recognizes, I think, that in a global economy, it is absolutely necessary out of self-interest to understand the importance of a diverse marketplace, not only those who are buying products and services, but the production of those products and services will entail a very diverse workplace. And so you are seeing very aggressively the business community trying to understand that diversity and to create it in the workplace. And I'm convinced through my short experience with Renaissance that this is not mere rhetoric, but that indeed decisions like GM's to clean up and assemble and put together an industrial park at Clark Street, the empowerment zone commitment by the banks to upgrade or increase lending activity, announcements like Chrysler's to invest $1.3 billion over the next 5 years in improving manufacturing facilities in the city, and I think in many ways, most symbolically and in real terms important, GM's decision to locate its global headquarters in Detroit at the Renaissance Center are real statements and real investments about the importance of understanding and engaging in the furthering of diversity.
Well, I'm not going to let you off the hook that easy. I think, Paul, that you're on point in sharing in terms of advances and progresses that we've made. But I think what legislators get most frequently when you talk about access and opportunity, the real question becomes for those private sector corporations that do have a significant impact on the quality of life for City of Detroit residents in general, African Americans in particular. Where are the African Americans in those corporations? We've heard that it's very difficult at times to find qualified candidates. Is that really the issue? Are there candidates that just have not been sought, or do we need to provide a mechanism for assistance in providing candidates that perhaps can achieve that goal? I think that some private sector entities like GM are an exception to the rule. They have been able to realize that based on global competition, they do need to have people of color throughout their organization, even though it's a continuing challenge to maintain that in the workforce. But when you talk about Michigan corporations, if you look at the top private 500 corporations in Michigan, and you try to identify what their commitment might be for inclusion strategies, whether it's at the executive level or at the procurement level. The question is, why isn't it occurring? Can we do something that would either provide incentives for implementation of diversity strategies, or is there just a real problem in still breaking that glass ceiling?
Well, I really have, on that one, and I'm not trying to duck it, I really think it's appropriate to defer to some others around the table who represent employers specifically. The question I was asked is about my membership, and I can comment on the investment, which signifies the importance that I think the business community places on diversity. In terms of internal corporate strategies on procurement and hiring, I'm not in the best position to really address that, except to say that, well, I'll just anecdotally say this, and this gets to the question of Michigan versus my membership. A couple years ago, when the issue of seriously surfaced in the legislature about let's attack affirmative action, I knew as leader that I was going to be put front and center on that. And the first thing I did was to go out and talk to those who have been working with affirmative action programs, namely universities and the corporate community. And I was struck by the commitment of both communities to affirmative action and the caution they threw up about messing around with this legislatively because of the importance they saw with affirmative action programs, not because this is some altruism, but because they see it as a self-interest issue in a global marketplace.
Paul, since we've started with Detroit Renaissance, may I ask you this? One, we talked about the commitments of GM and other companies in the empowerment zone. Other than the change in administration, why weren't these corporations doing these things for the last 15 to 20 years? What has changed that would make them do these things now when, according to what you've said, it would be good business strategy to invest in Detroit and diversify their workforce? And two, inasmuch as Detroit Renaissance plays a strong role in the downtown partnership organization and has some say over some of the development that occurs in the city, what is your sense of Black participation in what seems to be an emerging renaissance in downtown? For instance, I might draw attention to the fact that just the construction of the stadiums seems to have, instead of generating new businesses, seems to have obliterated some of the businesses that were already in the Fox Theater District. So what does the Detroit Renaissance Board think in terms of Black involvement in this development downtown, and also why do we suddenly have this urge to invest in Detroit?
First of all, on the change in investment in the city, it's all part of an evolution. I think the auto industry and American manufacturing at large has gone through enormous change in the last 20 years. 20 years ago, or maybe a little further back, companies thought that their future was assured by just working on American markets and doing things as they were doing them in if not a monopolistic situation, certainly a very dominant place in the marketplace. What's happened over time is that competition has emerged internationally. The world is a much more diverse place, and our country as a marketplace is increasingly diverse. Companies have adjusted to that reality and are more competitive today and have more capital to invest. 15, 20 years ago, companies were figuring out how to survive, and we're very introspective, I think, in trying to figure out what will it take internally to be able to compete in this new marketplace. Today, it's a much more competitive situation. The economy is much healthier, and so are these companies. And so the evolution, I think, is fit together. On the downtown, the really Renaissance and even the downtown partnership have not been that involved with the stadium issues. We have members who are directly involved. But that really comes down to, I think, a broader issue in the community of how we do planning in the city and what it takes to assemble property for any kind of development. And I think that for a long time, the city has been on such hard times that any kind of big new project has been welcomed, but has put the city in a rather reactive position where whatever it takes, let's get it done. It's not been, we haven't had the luxury as a community to really do some long-range planning and figure out how things might fit into an overall plan that preserves what we have in some cases as well as builds new. And I think we're going to see changes in the next couple of years as the city now has a lot more investment interest. I hope there will be a lot more focus on how we can plan in a way that keeps doors open of those ongoing businesses, as well as preserve some of the very rich architectural and business history that we have here. At the same time, we're inviting in new. It's a big issue for the city.
For the record, the question was asked by Michael Gooden from the Michigan Chronicle. Do we have a cordless mic? I would like, perhaps, David, I would like for you to perhaps try to follow up with Paul's question after William Beckham from New Detroit. I want you to respond to what your feeling is about the priority scale that Michigan corporations in general, Detroit corporations, have on race relations as president of New Detroit. And then perhaps, David, as one of the African Americans who has had substantial experience both in serving on private sector boards at significant levels. I would like to have, at least for the other legislators, to have the benefit of your insight to whether or not there is a change proactively in recruiting African American board members that can help implement diversity strategies or equity strategies for African American ownership. But let's start, I think, with you, Mr. Beckham.
Okay. Unlike Paul, I did not get that question in advance. I don't know if that relieves me of any responsibility for what I say or not, but I will attempt to address that. We, as you know, I mean, in New Detroit, I mean, race relations is our mission, and the biggest challenge in the 90s going into the year 2000 is how do you define it? I mean, what's the definition of, quote, race relations? I mean, what makes it good? What makes it bad? What gives a community a positive measure that race relations is good? And I think what we've tried to do at New Detroit in the past year is define it in terms of economics and education. That we thought there had to be some tangible measures that determine how folks kind of related to one another, but more importantly, how they related to the basic economic and education and other social measures in the community in which they live. And I like to kind of paint the picture in some rather vivid terms for those who read the Sunday paper, for those of you who read it or pick it up off the sidewalk because you don't buy it and take a look at it. There was a John Pepper story that gave some statistics about the racial composition of the city of Detroit compared to the 10 largest cities. And that picture pretty vividly says that Detroit has almost twice the African-American population of any of the 10 largest cities in the country. It talked about the per capita income, where it's half the per capita income of any other area in the region. It talked about education levels in terms of funding for education, where it tends to be half. If you look at other data that shows educational achievement being half of the other areas in the region, you look at minority business ownership and you see it far below in terms of gross revenues, below any other businesses in the region. You look at projections on where the minority businesses are as it relates to the marketplace, and they're in the markets that have either no growth or very small or limited in terms of dollars. You look at minority businesses that are working, and you find their margins and their profit margins are much smaller and much more narrow than the larger or moderate businesses owned by other groups. I use that picture to say that's the reality of the world we are in Detroit. So when we talk about race relations, we have to talk about how that group of people who comprises 76% of the population fare against other measurements that we consider to be good when you're talking about the city. I use a simplistic analogy. If I'm out of work, or when I do work, I only work for 3 or 4 months, and if my kids really don't get a very good shot at learning and educating so they can improve themselves, and if my neighborhood is one of the worst in the neighborhood or in the city, and I go 2 blocks over and look at somebody who looks a little bit different than me, and they have a job, and their kids learn, and they own a business, and they can do all the things everybody says I should do, then I'm going to have a hard time liking that person. Not personally, but just reality. That when I can earn and learn and develop and prosper and participate on an equitable basis in my community, I pretty much like everybody. I mean, I don't have any real problems. I may have some personal problems, but so race relations has to do with how do we deal with the conditions of people in the community. And so if you ask me about the corporations, I mean, I think there are truly some institutional problems, some institutional barriers to addressing these issues. I mean, the fact that, I mean, I doubt very seriously if you can go into any corporation today and they are going to in any way even believe that they commit in a very aggressive way to things that cause the kinds of economic disparities we're talking about, or educational disparities or social disparities. They are institutional. They are ways businesses have run and operate over a number of years, the results of which begin to grow and grow and grow and exacerbate the disparities. I challenge corporations today to sit and look in the mirror and say, okay, if you recognize the numbers don't look right, I mean, if kids really aren't achieving as they should in the city of Detroit, If businesses aren't prospering as minority businesses, if housing isn't doing what it's doing, if the economic measures we use aren't right and the social measures aren't right, somewhere somebody is doing something that exacerbates it. And so it's a question of looking and saying and being very honest in what we call a no-fault environment. That says we're not talking about blaming, we're talking about identifying and fixing. Look at the glass ceilings. I mean, the hiring policies. Look at the training and development policies inside a company. Who gets developed and trained to be promoted?
Where do you see it on a 1 to 10 scale, priority scale for private sector?
I think right now it's getting pretty high on the priority list. I mean, I think it's growing because it's a threat to their economic interests. I mean, I tell the simplistic story. What makes people do things in this country is economics. It's economic driven. It's economic interest, and it's a community defining its interest. And I don't think in Detroit, given the reality of the population we look at, we have really taken a hard look at us as a community defining what is our common interest as it relates to the social, economic, and educational development, i.e. race relations.
Do we have a cordless mic over there for the chairman of Lewis and Munday to respond?
The mic is here. Is it working?
It's working.
Okay. Keith, I heard two questions directed to me. One on the priority race relations in the area, and second from my experience on 4 or 5 corporate boards, my view of the progress that the corporate community is making in terms of diversity. And for a moment there, I wasn't certain whether you were referring to Dave Campbell or David Lewis, but I think you clarified that.
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
The fact that I think that we can all recognize just by looking at the rather home response that the President's Commission on Race Relations has received is that race relations have not been given in the past and currently is not being given the sort of priority that is necessary to realize the full potential about which Rod spoke for the country, for the citizens of the country. And the most discouraging phenomenon that I see right at the moment is that the minority community really does not have a broad-based cheerleading group as American citizens who, for one reason or another, have not been able to participate in the benefits of American life. Rather than having broad-based encouragement in many respects, I think we find a number of different initiatives that have taken place on the in the public sector through legislation or in the private sector through private initiatives attacked. And in the times of prosperity, that makes for a very confusing situation. But just flipping over to the second question, in the corporate world, clearly diversity is on the radar screen. But from my experience, the progress in turning the goal of diversity into a workplace reality is still far from the grasp of the corporate community. In an environment where there's a good amount of downsizing and consolidations, from the corporate boardroom, the statistics do not reflect significant progress at the upper levels of the corporations in which I'm involved. I'd be surprised if there's any statistic which would reflect that there has really been significant progress in the managerial level as far as minorities and women are concerned. But there are efforts underway, so there's still a good amount of work needed in those areas. And the role of a person such as myself and others who are involved in the corporate community is always to push the edge of the envelope and to see that corporate senior management lives up to the commitments that are made and have been widely embraced by the corporate community. But looking at the
There's not a day that I don't walk into Mishkan that I don't remember I'm a black person here. I mean, I have made strides in the company. Just recently was promoted to Director of Corporate Relations for the Detroit area. But there are no guarantees that I will continue to progress, that opportunities will be available for African Americans. It's something that, as an insider, and other insiders may agree with us, that we have to constantly work at, putting the question out there to senior management on diversity. We just recently appointed a director of diversity, because while diversity at Mishkan is now on the radar screen, Dave raises a really good point. How do you translate this into real life, everyday experience that is positive for African Americans and other minorities? So we're working on that, but you know, I guess I could say there's probably a glass ceiling or a plexiglass ceiling, but how do we get around that? Well, I think there's some real personal accountability as you rise through the ranks as an African American in corporate America to make sure that there are ways to get around the glass ceiling if in fact there is one. I remember my grandmother used to say, if you can't get something through the front door, maybe you go around and get it through the back door. So you've got to constantly be meeting the challenges of race relations and diversity within the company, and also reaching back to help those who are coming behind us. Because once we reach a certain level in corporate America, there often is a certain complacency. Well, I got here, I can kind of kick back now. No, you can never kick back. You've got to meet the challenges, make sure that you keep pushing ahead and bringing those behind you who can take your place when you move on. So as an African American in corporate America, there is never a day when you can rest.
Well, I think that Karen, what you're describing is a challenge for those people that seek professions inside, and how they move and what they must do in order to mentor, support, and grow in their profession. But our real challenge, I think, when we're sitting in Lansing, one of the things that we struggle with is how to frame public policy in a way which guarantees that African Americans have an opportunity to obtain equity stakes in new business opportunities or new economic sectors. So if you're not sitting at a significant policy level within, and I'm not picking on Mishkan, but since you're Mishkan, I'll pick on Mishkan for a second. Okay. If Mishkan decides that they are now going to move gradually through a restructuring of their employee workforce toward using outside contractors for meter reading, if you were in those discussions 2 or 3 years before that process actually begins, you may begin to identify someone on the outside that has the expertise or capability to either develop the workforce or has a ready-made workforce that you could bring in to do that service for you. Now, illegally, some people would say that's inside trading. You know that something's going to take place and you take advantage of it. But in other legal methods, they'll say it's teaming or partnering or finding a collaborative relationship. And I guess what we're struggling with as we frame policy, it is very difficult for us to always see what the equity opportunities could be for African Americans. When we find out about it, the opportunity is over. And I think that's what Mike Gooden from the Chronicle was asking Paul when he talked about downtown development. I mean, if we knew where the land speculation was going, we'd be there too. But because we're not involved in those discussions at a significant level, we have to somehow identify ways to gain that kind of commitment from those individuals who are there, or we have to find ways to find African Americans that can obtain equity interests in a sector that will allow those opportunities to be created. Representative Thomas, can you help frame this just a little bit?
Thank you very much, Representative Stallworth, and thank you to each of our panelists for participating this morning. I'm a little bit on the hot seat as well, and that, like Mr. Beckham, I didn't have the question. But I do have a question, actually, that I was hoping to pose. The average annual gross receipt of a black-owned company in the state of Michigan is $51,000. That's certainly not big business. That's barely making a living if those are the annual gross receipts. Just imagine what the net profit is there. As a legislator, I struggle every day with the reality that I can't legislate the entrepreneurial spirit. I just can't make that happen. How do we, if we're going to have a frank discussion about business opportunities, create those opportunities to get the spirit of entrepreneurialism in the African American community, but then to get the companies beyond that spirit and have just the technical experience necessary to get a business going and thriving? And I'd be very interested in any comments from any of the panelists we have assembled here today.
Let Jackie Vaughn and Ron Hall take a stab at that.
You want to go first, Jackie?
I think, can you hear it? Okay.
You're wearing two hats, so tell them, both of them.
I'm the president of the Booker T. Washington Business Association, and also I'm the president of Vaughn Marketing, which is a small business in Detroit. And I think to address that issue is, from a corporate standpoint, I think corporations have to be a little bit more understanding and open to the contracting opportunities that they become aware of. I know that a lot of companies have diversity programs, and they have programs where they're trying to bring in suppliers, et cetera, but are they really realistic in terms of what their expectations are? I think a lot of the backroom, boardroom types of things that go on that Keith was alluding to in terms of having people in places, that's an institutional thing that's gone on for years. And I don't think today, I think we're moving in a direction, but today we will solve those issues, because if you look at the golf courses that we can't join, you look at those, the good old boy network, a lot of those opportunities we'll never see in a larger perspective. We'll get little pieces of crumbs. Now, to give you an example, because I have an African American company, when I walk into corporate America in terms of doing marketing, they always say, oh, here she is. She's going to deliver us the African American market. Well, I have a background that's not only African American, but I know the general market too. But I don't get a piece of that larger pie. I just get a little piece that's put over to the side to say, okay, we're going to set aside this little piece so we could say, yeah, we're corporate America and we are doing something with African Americans. So we're not getting the bigger picture. In terms of how do we help develop them, I think that situations where the pricing and the cost become a situation, we need to know the company and know how to help grow the small businesses. We're not really, corporate America is not really doing a lot of that. Detroit is trying, but if you look at the statistics, and I go back to what Bill said, in looking at that article last Sunday, you see that entrepreneurs, we're not really there in terms of having some type of equal mix. We're being swallowed up. And that's what's happening. Larger companies are taking a larger segment. So we have to do more of partnerships and joint ventures so that we can become stronger. We need encouragement from the community as well as from, we was talking to David earlier, if we do not understand how to collaborate and come together so that we can become stronger, we won't. So I think those are some areas that we can go in personally, but from a corporate standpoint, I think they need to be more realistic.
Ron Hall?
Thank you. I work with, as you know, I work with quite a few of the major corporations, and I've been president of the Michigan Minority Business Development Council for 5 years, and there's been significant movement, I'd say, in the last three and a half years, because it's in the corporate America's best interest. Generally, you aren't going to be able to get major corporations to move significantly unless it's in their best interest to do so. We have a wonderful opportunity at this point in time in America, as Paul pointed out, to really get some things done because it's in their best interest to do it. my job, and I think perhaps what you and Lansing can do, is to continue to carry the message that it's in their best interest to embrace cultural diversity, not only just try to manage it, but embrace it and turn it into a competitive tool. And I do that everywhere I go. I advocate, I think, as part of what I should do. Why I do that in terms of my presidency is I'm trying to create opportunity from major corporations for minority businesses. If you can create the opportunity, and this goes to your question, Buzz, we feel as though minority businesses will grow into those opportunities. You aren't going to get someone to invest a lot of time and all of their money to go into business unless there's a fairly comfortable knowledge that the opportunity is there. So you have to create the opportunity first. And then the energy will be there for folks to say, well, so-and-so is doing it, there's an opportunity over here, it's time for me to jump out there and try it. And when you do that, you have to have the infrastructure in place to be supportive of these minority businesses. And you're absolutely right, most, unfortunately, or just facts, most minority businesses are first-generation businesses, so they don't have that family background and to fall back on. And so there needs to be an infrastructure that can support these businesses, places where they can go and get information, help with strong business plans. As Mel and I were talking earlier today, someplace where they can get the money. All of those things we're trying to work on, at least within my organization, and I think others are doing it as well. You know, our spin today is that the opportunity is there now. I think this attack on affirmative action is a political thing, and they're fighting it in the colleges, and obviously I have my own opinion about that. But businesses understand it's in their best interest to embrace cultural diversity. That's where the workforce is going to be. The empowering minorities economically is in the best interest of America.
Well, I think, Ron, you're preaching to the choir here, but I will tell you that is not our experience in Lansing. And I'll use the one example. I think it probably is not fair to give this to Paul under his watch. I think it was a predecessor. But the actual retreat from Public Act 428 of 1980, which was Michigan's set-aside law, the actual lawsuit on that was filed by the Michigan Road Builders Association. Now, as you know, we're in a very, very massive road building, resurfacing, and repairing process for our roads and bridges. We'll spend close to $1 billion in the next fiscal year on road and bridge contracts. Now, as members of, I think, the Detroit delegation, which comprises both majority and African-American members and members of the African-American Caucus in general, were concerned about giving that much money to an organization who filed the lawsuit that would provide guaranteed contractual opportunities for our community. So we withheld support on the gas tax that the governor wanted because we were not going to vote for a bill that would not provide opportunity and access for participation for our community. And as you know, as a result of some very tough debate and negotiations, we were able to rewrite Senate Bill 303, which is the distribution formula for transportation funding in Michigan, which requires now the Michigan Department of Transportation to use you, Michigan Minority Business Development Council, along with the State Chamber, in reviewing all RFPs and RFQs to ensure that they're designed in a way which provide for inclusion of African American and disadvantaged firms and women-owned firms, But the other piece was we also knew that they frequently use bonding or credit as a reason not to award contracts to small businesses in general, African American firms in particular. So we put a surety division in there to assure that there would be support. So my point is, if we were not focused on that one small piece and came up with a policy initiative that would affect change, there was no reason for the road builders to go out and seek you or your members as subcontractors or joint venture partners to do the business transaction. They've got an incentive now to do that because those businesses that have African American partners with them will fare much better in the RFP and RFQ process. And I guess that's what we're struggling with, is how we can help you do a better job. I want to go to Bill Beckham, and then I want to go to Mel Farr, and then to Karen Farmer.
Okay, not to dominate, I'll be very, very short. A couple of points I wanted to make. One of them on Karen Farmer. I worked, 13, 14 years in the corporate world, private sector as well, as a corporate officer of a Fortune 500 company. And one of the things one learns when one is there is that until there is a stronger mix of, in this case, African Americans in senior management positions, it's very difficult to, in fact, change the complexion of that business. Not because, again, people don't want to do, but the tendency and habit is to do what is comfortable. Go where one knows. I mean, the hiring firms you hire are all white firms. The recruiting you do is at all white colleges. The promotions you do with people who are in your community or neighborhood whose wives talk and know each other. There's a certain culture in a corporate world that feeds on itself. Not in an evil way, not in a predetermined way. It becomes almost accepted practice. And one of the things we argue for is there has to be a much greater representation of people of color at senior management decision-making levels, not just, and I don't say this in a demeaning way, the staff functions, but line functions as well, because that's where it really begins to have an impact on the basic culture, nature, and by the way, the behavior of people in the companies. I use a quick example, police cars. When you integrate the police car, I mean, when it was two white officers, hitting a black guy was clearly based on the fact that it was two white guys beating up a black person. And so it was a racial issue. When you put a black and white in there, two blacks, and they beat the guy up, the guy was just mad because he got beat up. Nothing to do with race. And what the integration of the car does, it begins to modify the behavior of the party. And so by integrating your corporate management and governance structures, it begins to dictate a change in the behavior of the policies of the company. And until you can do that, it's going to be very difficult to have a significant impact on how corporations handle themselves in a diverse environment. That's one point. On the entrepreneurship, it starts with young people. It starts with people who in very early years have a dream to want to own a business and run a business, and begins to do the things necessary to know what that means. Running a business is a unique skill. It's almost a unique culture. There are a whole lot of us who aren't willing to take the risk of running our own business. A lot of us who don't want to get into that. Now, for those of us who do, there are significant barriers. Access to capital is a major barrier. The ability to sustain the dips and the falls that are going to occur in the marketplace are key. And the danger we run into when we, quote, subsidize or start businesses on an entitlement or subsidy basis is that we're taking that business out of the rules of the marketplace and putting it into an artificial economic structure where it probably won't survive very long. And what we're going to have to start doing is getting businesses into the same economic measure, the same economic mainstream, the same marketplace as any other business. Don Barton's a classic example. He survives because he's a marketplace-driven business. Mel Farr, marketplace-driven business, has the capitalization, has the access to capital. Without that, it's very difficult. Young people in high schools today are getting more and more attuned to entrepreneurship, but they can't find enough success stories in the community they want to do business to want to run the risk. Also, forget color. Who is encouraged to put businesses in a community where the per capita income is half that of the surrounding areas? It's not good economics. You're not going to be able to hire a lot of folks, pay a lot of good salaries, and more importantly, sustain yourself when there's any kind of dip or downturn. So we've got to get realistic about the economics of race relations. And it starts with education, it starts with access to capital, and it starts with a commitment of a community, white and black. We mentioned the choir, singing to the choir. problem is this choir isn't big enough. We need some other voices. Those who have the capital, those who have the controls, those who run the companies must become a part of the choir, because that's where your fix is. And so we keep talking to ourselves, and we keep saying the same old things. And I can venture to say this discussion 20 years ago, if we taped it and played it back, it wouldn't sound much different. And if we can't institutionally change, if we can't get behavior to change, institutional practices, institutional discrimination in the economic arena, we're going to be here 20 years from now saying the same thing.
Well, let me say this, Bill, and then we'll go to Mel. That's really why we wanted you here. I focused on the transportation issue because the only reason we were able to get movement is that Michigan was screaming for road repair. Every day that went by in Lansing and dollars were not allocated to bridge and road repair, every elected official felt that heat. We had something to barter with. We had our vote. And what I'm suggesting is that those opportunities are far too infrequent. When people are forced to come to the table to compromise for something, as Ron said, it was in their best interest to solve this. Contractors wanted to go back to work. Citizens wanted to drive without hitting potholes. It was in their interest to include African Americans in that process to meet their interests, as Ron said. But what we're suggesting, sitting there in the Capitol, we don't necessarily have access to the information we need that impacts their money to the extent they will make a decision. Frequently, we talk about utilization of firms that, as Karen was saying, trying to get more African Americans hired. That's important. Hiring is important. Investing in firms that have the capability to hire our own is also important, which increases the income in your immediate community, was what you're talking about. And so the real issue is, what can we do? And that's why, as you're framing your responses and suggestions, we've got Penny Stump from the Michigan Jobs Commission, we've got Elroy from the governor's office, we've got someone from the One Stop Capital Shop, a few banks here. They know that they are not interested in doing a lot of loans that aren't credit-worthy risks. So some of that we have to do for ourselves, but policy-wise, what we really need is to have a sense of some target areas that perhaps we can focus on that can create some economic opportunities when we have the opportunity to use our influence in Lansing. Mel?
Keith, I want to personally commend you on having this discussion today, because I think it's a very, very important discussion, and especially when you're talking about economic development here in Michigan and also in this country. You know, I want to go back to Buzz, your question originally. You talked about, and you made the statement that the average black business has gross receipts of $51,000, and you say, you know, why that? Well, it's like Ron and Bill. It has to do with capital. I mean, it has to do with you can't grow a business if you have no cash. And I don't. I just want to make a statement, and it was a very good statement, because we have a tendency to categorize people by how they look and what they do. And years I've was categorized as a football player and an athlete, and you know, all we are supposed to do is score touchdowns and make baskets and etc. And because of the fact that I thought that I was just more than a football player, I thought that I could be a pretty decent businessman if I was given an opportunity. And it goes back to affirmative action. You would not see Mel Farr here today sitting around his table if it wasn't for affirmative action, because it gave me an opportunity to buy my first dealership in 1975. And from that, it's enabled me to be the largest African American auto dealer in the country and the second largest African American business in the country. But it doesn't say a lot for African American business, that I have the second largest in this country. It says that, boy, we've got a long ways to go. We've got a very, very long ways to go. Bill, it doesn't get easier for Don Barton or Mel Farr because we are at the stage we are right now. It gets tougher. Why it gets tougher? Well, because in order for us to grow, we need cash. You know, I would like to be the little company in Jackson, Mississippi, that offered $28 billion to buy MCI. You know, I mean, somebody had to loan them what? The cash, you know. So, I mean, it gets harder for Mel Farr because Mel Farr, I mean, I want to continue to grow. In order for Mel Farr to continue to grow, I need what? I need the accessibility of that capital, accessibility of that cash. So no, it's not that it becomes easier, Bill. It becomes tougher. It all depends on your goals and your objectives and where you want to go. And you talk about the lack of entrepreneurs in this country. I'm gonna just tell you, you know, kids, you know, they can only imitate what they see. And if they don't see black businesses, they can't what? They can't emulate it. I asked a question to Governor England and Jack Kemp 2 years ago up at the Renaissance. We were having a dinner in Jack's room, and Jack was trying to get me to support him, and I said, Jack, it's going to be very difficult for me to support you because of the platform and how it feels against on affirmative action. But I said, let me just pose a question to you. I said, you know, here in the Detroit area, you know, I happens to fly around a television with a cape on, and everyone sees this black guy flying on television with a cape, so quite naturally that gets their attention. And I said, when I go to the high schools and I speak, I say, you know, after I get through speaking, you know the most often asked question of Mel Farr once I get through speaking? And they all gave me the answer, well, how much money you make, or what kind of car you drive. This was and how you get started. I said, no, that's not the question they asked me. The question they asked Mel Farr is, Mel Farr, would you give me a job? I said, no, you need an education. They said, no, Mel Farr, I need a job. And the reason why they asked me that question because they see me as a what? A person who can employ them. All right? So I say if it's one thing that we can do here is we need to look at, you know, we're talking about putting the casinos in Detroit and the stadiums in Detroit and et cetera. But really, how many jobs are there's going to be for our kids in our neighborhood? How many jobs is that going to represent? Because what Detroiters need and our kids need, they need jobs. Because if we don't give them that opportunity for jobs, they're going to go out and create jobs. And you know the kind of jobs that they're creating, the jobs they're creating are the kind of jobs that we don't want them to be what? Involved in. So I say it's a deeper problem. I say, yeah, we have to look at ourselves and say what kind of opportunities are we providing for those in Detroit. And I'm gonna just give you another example because you know, I'm out here in this business world, and believe me, I feel that I have the toughest job in America as an executive. And the reason why I say I have the toughest job in America, and I was telling that to Rod earlier, is because of the fact that trying to manage the diversity. You see, in my business, it's very difficult for me to hire, you know, very competent help to work for me. And the reason why is because it's hard for me to hire white managers in our dealerships because I'm an African American. It's difficult for me to hire African Americans in my dealerships, in my businesses, because the African Americans don't have the experience or the expertise. So I have to be able to try and manage that diversity, and it is a very, very big and basic problem that we have, because you're going to only be as good as the employees that you hire. So we say, and I say that it gets tougher, Bill. It doesn't get easier. But I also just want to kind of just sum this thing up when I say that we kind of characterize it. Everybody, Don Cornelius, the guy who he has been the guy on Soul Train for all those years, and he now is going back. Don was supposed to dance at least once. He said, "Can you dance?" He looked at the guy and said, "Can white folks get credit?" So, I mean, you look at it when you say...
We're laughing, but it's not funny.
We're laughing, but it's not funny. So when white folks look at us, they say, we what? We can dance. All black folks can what? Dance. And when black folks look at white folks, they say, all white folks can get what? Credit. And and what we need to provide that same opportunity, for African American businessmen, so that they can grow their business, so they can start out in their business, is we need the accessibility to the capital. If we don't get that, I don't care what else we do, it's not going to work, because you can't make it without cash.
The preceding program has been made possible by grants from the General Motors Corporation, the R.J. Reynolds Company, and the Black Caucus Foundation of Michigan.